The gate guard's report reached me at the 3rd hour of the morning watch, delivered in the flat tone my men use when something has unsettled them, and they'd rather I didn't notice. A woman at the South Harbor Gate, my lord. Freeborn. No pack claim, no wolf. Requesting a 3-day passage permit for a supply route through Dravenmore territory, dried herbs, salt compound, bone-set medicines. Her papers are correct. I didn't look up from the Tide Ledger. Granted. She's the wolves at the gate, my lord. They haven't moved aside. I looked up then. The gate wolves had held that post for 6 years. They moved aside for pack members, for known traitors on my approved list, and for no one else. I had seen them stand stone still before armed war parties, without a single hair rising along their spines, and those war parties had turned around. Which wolves? Byrne and Sal, my lord. They haven't moved aside, but they also haven't shown teeth. He paused. They're just looking at her. I closed the ledger. I'll come down. I told myself I was going because an unexplained behavior in the gate wolves was a security matter. That was true. It was not the whole truth, but I did not examine the rest of it. In 9 years of running Dravenmore, I had learned that examining things too closely sometimes showed you something you weren't ready to see. She was standing in the gate arch when I came down the saltstone steps, and she was not doing what people usually do when they are standing at my gate, and I appear at the top of those steps. Most people step back. Most people drop their eyes or square their shoulders and make a show of not dropping their eyes, which is its own kind of retreat. A few have gone pale. She looked up at me, noted my arrival, and looked back at the wolves. She was perhaps 30, it was difficult to say. She had one of those faces that carries both youth and steadiness in the same expression, the way still water can look shallow and deep at once. Her coat was plain oiled canvas, her supply pack worn at both straps. She smelled of salt cedar and dried herbs from several paces away, and under that, something quieter that I couldn't name and didn't try to. Byrne and Sal were sitting in the gate arch, not 3 feet from her, watching her with the particular focused attention they reserved for things that confused them. They had not moved aside. They also, I confirmed, had not raised a single hair or shown a tooth. She was looking back at them with the same quality of attention. "My Lord Cale," the guard said helpfully. She looked up at me again. "I heard you hold the permit authority." "I do." "My papers are correct," she said. "It was not defensive, it was simply information." "I know." I read the summary. I came down the last 4 steps and stopped a few feet from her, and Byrne turned his great gray head toward me, considered me, and turned back to her. I had owned Byrne for 6 years. He had never done that before, turned back to anything other than me when I came into a space. "What did you do?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "I was waiting, they came and sat." "They don't sit near strangers." "I noticed that the guard seemed surprised," she said. "I didn't touch them. I wasn't sure if that was permitted." There was no flattery in the way she said that. No performance of deference. She was just being accurate. She hadn't known the protocol, so she'd held still and waited to learn it. I had spent 9 years surrounded by men who flattered and angled and calculated, and the plainness of her manner landed strangely, like cold water on a morning when I'd expected nothing. "It's permitted," I said. She put her hand down, not quickly, not tentatively, a slow, steady lowering, open-palmed. Sal sniffed her fingers. Byrne did the same. Neither of them moved away. 3 days, I said. Supply route. You'll register your stops with the harbor office by midday. Thank you, my lord. She put her papers away and stepped through the gate, and Byrne stood up and followed her. I watched this happen. Byrne had never followed anyone through a gate who wasn't pack. "Byrne," I said. He paused and looked back at me. The look was, I still don't have a word for it, patient. Almost explanatory. Then he turned and caught up with her, and the two of them went down the harbor lane together, and Sal remained at the gate because he knew better than to abandon his post. But he watched her go in a way that made it clear the post felt considerably less important than it had an hour ago. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have. Then I went back up the steps and told myself it was nothing. I thought about the permit exactly twice that first day, both times briefly, and told myself each time that it was administrative interest and not anything else. By evening I had reviewed her registration slip from the harbor office. Sarin, freeborn, settlement of Asheld on the Graymere coast. Healer's supply trader, she'd listed her stops accurately, 6 in 3 days, all legitimate. The Bone Setter on Crane Wharf, the Pack Infirmary, the Eastern Market stalls, 2 private households with registered medical accounts, and the Salt Compound warehouse on the Cliff Road. Her handwriting was level and unhurried. I put the slip down and went to the hall for the evening meal. Byrne was not in his usual place beside my chair. This had not happened in 6 years. I asked, and the hall steward told me, with an expression of elaborate neutrality, that Byrne had been seen at various points throughout the day in the vicinity of the Harbor Lane and the Eastern Market. He had returned to the hold at dusk. He was currently outside the door of the East guest room, which was the room she had been assigned. I said nothing. I ate. I went to bed. In the morning, I told myself it was residual gate confusion, a novel scent, the wolf's equivalent of professional curiosity. This was the story I gave myself, and I found it reasonably convincing until the 3rd hour of the following day, when my hall steward found me in the ledger room and told me, again with elaborate neutrality, that 3 of the pack pups had somehow made their way to the East guest passage and were currently asleep in a pile outside her door along with Byrne, and that she had brought them a water bowl and a strip of dried meat each from her own supplies, and had then stepped carefully around them to continue her work. I closed the ledger. She didn't disturb them. She went around them, my lord, took the long passage. I had a wall report to review and a coastal dispute to mediate. I reviewed the wall report. I did not intend to be in the Harbor Lane that second afternoon. I had legitimate reason to be there. The Salt Compound warehouse had a lease renewal coming up, and I had told myself for 3 weeks that I would walk it in person. I walked it in person that afternoon. This was a coincidence. She was on the Cliff Road above the warehouse, repacking her supply bag outside the Bone Setter's door when I came up the steps from the lane. She heard me, or didn't. It was hard to tell, because she didn't startle and she didn't look up until she'd finished the knot she was tying. "My lord," she said. "Good afternoon," I said. This was not a phrase I used often. I was not entirely sure why I used it then. She glanced at the warehouse behind me. "Lease check. Renewal." She nodded as though that were a reasonable thing for the lord of a coastal wolf kingdom to be doing on a Tuesday afternoon, and I appreciated the lack of commentary. "How is the permit working?" I asked. "Efficiently. Your harbor office is well organized." "Good." We stood there for a moment. She was looking out over the cliff edge toward the gray water below, the wind moving her hair. She seemed entirely comfortable with the silence. Most people fill silence around me as quickly as they can. They produce conversation the way prey animals produce distraction. She just stood in it, watching the water. "Your gate wolves are well," she said eventually. "Byrne has been walking the lane with me. I hope that's not an inconvenience." "It's unusual. He's good company. He waits outside the houses and doesn't frighten anyone." She looked at me sideways briefly. "I think he's decided something." "What has he decided?" She seemed to consider the question seriously before answering it. "I'm not entirely sure. Something favorable, I think." She resettled the pack strap on her shoulder. "I'll be out of the East Passage by tomorrow evening. I can clear the pups if you need the corridor." "Leave them," I said. She looked at me. "They chose the spot," I said. This sounded, even as I said it, as though it meant more than I intended. Let them keep it. A small warmth moved across her face, not a full smile, something quieter, a settling of the expression as though something had confirmed itself. All right, she said. I'll mind the step. She went down the cliff road. I stood at the top of it a moment too long, watching the point where she'd been. I extended the permit that evening, 3 more days. The official reason I entered in the ledger was ongoing supply route assessment, coastal commerce review. I wrote it in my own hand, and I did not look too hard at it. My beta, Reich, found me in the armory the next morning and said nothing for a long time, which was how I knew he had something to say. The pack is talking, he said eventually. The pack always talks. About the healer woman. I tested the edge of a wall blade I already knew was properly maintained. Say what you're saying, Reich. Byrne slept outside her door again. The old female, Wren, she's been 7 years letting no one touch her since she was injured. The healer redressed her leg yesterday. Wren didn't move, didn't growl. He paused. The pack is saying the wolves know something. Wolves don't know things, they sense things. That's the same statement my lord, said differently. I set the blade down. Reich was the only man in Dravenmore who spoke to me that way, and that was why I kept him. She's a healer, I said. They respond to healers. They respond to pack healers, Reich said. Trained pack wolves don't behave like this with outside healers. She has no wolf of her own. She's unaffiliated. The pack is treating her like. He stopped. Like what? He looked at me steadily. You know what? I did know. I didn't say it. I set the blade back on its hook and left the armory. That afternoon I was in the North Salt Yard on legitimate business when I saw her crossing the upper wharf toward the Eastern Market. Byrne was at her left shoulder. 2 of the younger pack wolves, Cass and Tara, were at her right flank. All 3 of them were moving with the relaxed, purposeful stride of escorts who have chosen their charge and see no reason to explain themselves. She was talking to them, I realized. Not commands, not the instructional tone people use when they want to appear comfortable with wolves. Just talking. The low, even murmur of someone narrating their afternoon to a companion. I was too far to hear the words. I didn't need to. Something shifted in my chest that I could only describe as recognition, though I had no context for it. As though something I'd been waiting to identify had just moved into the light. I finished the salt yard business and went back to the hall. I did not extend the permit that evening. I told myself this was because it would be conspicuous and that I would revisit it in the morning. In the morning she came to the hall. She came to the hall because 3 of her remaining stops had been unexpectedly canceled. 1 supplier had a family illness. 2 households had sent word that their needs could wait, and she wanted to inform me so her actual route in Dravenmore would match her registered paperwork. She told me this at the entrance of the hall, standing on the step below me, her pack over one shoulder, her papers correct in her hand. You didn't need to come here for that, I said. The harbor office handles adjustments. I know, she said. The harbor office was on my way. She was a very poor liar. She said it entirely levelly and with a straight face, and it was still quite obviously not true, because the harbor office was on the south end of the wharf, and the hall was on the cliff road above the North Salt Yard, and these were not in any configuration on the way from the East Guest Passage. I could have pointed this out. Come in, I said. I did not have a ready reason for saying this. I said it anyway, and she came up the step without any change in expression and followed me into the hall. The hall in the mid-morning is wide and gray, the iron lanterns down to coals, salt light coming through the north-facing slits in the stone. It is not a welcoming room. Most people find it imposing. She walked into it and looked around with the same quality of attention she'd given to the gate wolves, unhurried, taking note. It's a good hall, she said. It holds the wind out, I said. That's the main thing in a hall. We sat at the working end of the long table, not the ceremonial end. I directed her there without thinking, the way I'd seat someone I needed to speak with rather than impress, and she sat without comment. I ordered salt tea from the kitchen, something I did not usually do at this hour. We talked about the supply route for perhaps 10 minutes. The information exchanged was accurate and minor. Neither of us was primarily talking about the supply route. "You're from Asheld," I said, when the route conversation had concluded. "Born there. My mother's practice. A healer's family." "Yes, I took the supply side. I'm better with the logistics than the medicine, though I know enough to know what I'm moving." She wrapped her hands around the tea. "Graymere Coast is quieter now than it was. The old pack disputes have mostly settled. I've been extending my routes." "To Dravenmore?" "Eventually, yes." "You've heard of us." She met my eyes. "Everyone on the coast has heard of Dravenmore, my lord." "And still you came to the South Gate alone." She considered this. "You're feared, not lawless," she said. "There's a difference. I read the trade register before I came. Your harbor records are public and accurate. Your pack levy is fair." A pause. "And the salt cedar here is the best on the coast, and I've been trying to source it for 2 years." I found myself close to smiling, which was unusual enough that I noticed it. "3/4 rate for a standing supply agreement," I said. "Salt cedar and the Boneset compound. Registered trader status. You'd have open passage." She looked at me steadily for a moment. "That's a generous offer." "It's a fair one." "I'll need to think about it," she said. "A standing agreement means regular passage through Dravenmore. I want to understand what that involves." "It involves the same as it did this week," I said. "Clean papers, registered stops, harbor office check-in." "And the wolves?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. She set down the tea. "My lord, I've been in enough pack territories to know what it means when the wolves do what yours are doing. I'm not asking to make it difficult. I'm asking because I want to understand what I'm walking into if I say yes to a standing agreement." She was not making it difficult. She was being accurate, the way she had been accurate at the gate on the first morning. I had spent 9 years being given performance and calculation, and she was giving me plain information, and it was, quietly, the most disorienting thing that had happened to me in those 9 years. "It means they've decided something," I said. "I don't have a cleaner answer than that." "What have they decided?" "I'm working on that," I said. It was a more honest answer than I usually gave anyone. She seemed to understand its weight because she didn't push it. She finished the tea. She thanked me for it. She rose to go, and at the hall door she paused. "The standing agreement," she said without turning. "I'll think about it." "Take your time," I said. She went out. From the inner courtyard I heard, a moment later, Burns' low, pleased sound, the one he made when someone he'd chosen reappeared after an absence. I'd heard him make it perhaps twice in 6 years, both times for me. I sat in the hall for a while. The salt light moved across the stone floor. Something sat in my chest that I couldn't quite close around, not unpleasant, not comfortable, not anything I had a word for yet. I looked at the permit extension that evening and did not write anything in the ledger. I went instead to the armory, which was where I went when I needed to think without Reich finding me, and I thought. In 9 years I had held Dravenmore by being uncomplicated. My authority was uncomplicated. My needs were uncomplicated. I had entertained no-mate prospects, not because the council hadn't brought them. They had, 4 times in 9 years, good women from good packs, but because the wolf had given me nothing. No pull, no recognition, no whatever it was that I'd been told I would know when it happened. I had concluded, eventually, that it was not going to happen for me, and I had organized my life around that conclusion. The conclusion was proving inadequate. I did not know Saren. I had spoken to her 3 times across 5 days. I knew that she was steady and plain-spoken, and that she did not perform safety at my gate, and that she moved through unfamiliar territory with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned that most things are manageable if you approach them without panic. I knew that she had come to Dravenmore for Salt Cedar and had stayed, technically, for the permit, and that this was not quite the whole story. I knew that my wolves had decided something that I was several days behind on. I wrote the extension in the ledger, 7 more days. The reason I gave was standing trader agreement under review. It was true. It was also the least important part of what I was thinking, and I knew that, and I set the ledger down and went to bed and listened to the wind off the gray water and told myself I would be practical about it in the morning. In the morning, I was not particularly practical. She was in the pack infirmary on the 4th day, the 2nd day of the extension, because the infirmary's supply delivery had been short on the tincture compound she carried, and she had walked the gap herself. I learned this from the infirmary warden, who came to report it with the kind of expression that suggested it was both unexpected and welcome. Saren had apparently spent 2 hours with the injured wolves, not treating them. That was the infirmary healer's work, but present, quiet, refilling water bowls, checking supply organization. She has a good way with them, the warden said. The injured ones are usually tense with strangers. They weren't tense with her. I've noticed, I said. Byrne sat with old Wren the whole time she was there. Those two haven't been in the same room without tension since Wren lost her mate. I thanked the warden and went to find Reich. What do you know about Ashield settlement? I asked him. Small, borderless, no-pack claim, Graymere Coast. He looked at me. I know what you're actually asking. What am I actually asking? Whether she's free to make a standing arrangement. Whether she has ties, a mate claim, something that would complicate it. He paused. She doesn't. Ashield is a free settlement. She's been running solo supply routes for 6 years. No claim anywhere on the coast that I've heard of. You've been looking. Someone has too, he said, not unkindly. I said nothing. He said nothing back. We stood in the salt wind for a moment. My lord, he said, the pack has been certain since the first morning. You've always been slower than the pack. I am not slow, I said. I am thorough. You are very thorough, Reich agreed. We're all watching you be very thorough. I went back to the hall. She came to the hall again that evening, though I hadn't sent for her. She came the way she'd done before, directly, without announcement, stopping at the hall entrance to wait to be seen rather than pressing forward. I waved her in. I wanted to tell you, she said, setting her pack down near the door, that the standing agreement is yes. I looked up from the dispatch I was reading. The Salt Cedar and the compounds, she said. The registered trader status, 3/4 rate. She sat, I hadn't gestured to the chair, she simply sat, the way people do in rooms where they've decided they belong. I've thought about it. And the route is good. The harbor office is well run, as I said. The rate is fair, she paused, and the wolves have been good company. Those are the reasons, I said. She met my eyes. They're the professional reasons. The hall was quiet around us. The wind off the cliff came through the stone slits in its usual low voice. Somewhere below in the hold, Byrne was doing whatever Byrne did in the evenings, sleeping in the East Passage, most likely waiting for something he'd already decided on. I've been in 2 pack territories with standing agreements, she said. Both were straightforward. I understand what this one is and isn't. Tell me what you think this one is, I said. She considered. A good business arrangement, she said carefully, possibly more complicated than a standard standing agreement. I'm willing to come back regularly. I'm not willing to assume what that means beyond the regular coming back until I know it better. She looked at me steadily. I'm a practical woman, my lord. I don't walk into things I haven't looked at. You walked into my gate, I said. I looked at you for 3 years in the trade register before I came to your gate, she said. I found again that thing that was close to a smile. It was becoming familiar. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Practical, I agreed. The agreement is yes then. I'll have the harbor office draw it up. She nodded. She rose to go, and this time she made it further. She was at the door. She had her pack on her shoulder when Drav appeared. Drav is not a gate wolf. Drav has never been a working wolf. He came to me when he was a pup and he grew to an unusual size, and he has lived in the inner hall for 9 years in a kind of mutual, quiet authority. He keeps his end of the hall, I keep mine, and we have understood each other without much negotiation. He is gray-white, heavier than Bern, with eyes the color of deep water. He has not crossed the hall willingly in 9 years. In 9 years he has come to me when I called him, and he has allowed Reich near him, and once he permitted the pack healer to look at a paw. That is the extent of his concessions. He came through the inner arch in that moment, unhurried, that same stone-steady walk he always had, and crossed the hall without looking at me, which was unusual because he always looked at me when he entered a room and walked to the door where Saren was standing. She had gone still when he appeared. She had the good sense for that. She'd gone still and kept her hands loose at her sides and waited. He stopped in front of her. He was large enough that his head was nearly level with her chest. He looked at her for a long moment, that particular wolf examination, the one that goes somewhere deeper than the eyes. And then, with the deliberate slowness of something doing exactly what it has decided to do, he lowered his great head and pressed it into her hands. The sound she made was very small, not startlement, something softer than that, the exhale of someone who has just had something confirmed. She brought both hands up slowly and held his head, and I felt it. I felt it the way I imagine a wall feels when the tide finally finds the crack it's been working at for years, not a dramatic collapse, but a sudden complete passage, a rushing through of something that had been held back by sheer structure. Something in my chest opened, and through it came not heat but recognition, the way you feel a key in a lock, the way you know a face even in changed light. The mate bond. I had been told years ago that I would know it when it came. I had concluded it was not coming. I had been, apparently, extremely wrong. Saren lifted her eyes from Drav and looked at me. Her expression was careful and steady, but underneath it was something wide and wondering and just slightly afraid, the way people look when something they half believed in turns out to be real. "Your wolf," she said. "Yes. He's very large." "He is." Drav was still under her hands. He showed no interest in moving. "This is what it means," I said. My voice came out quieter than I intended. "What the gate wolves decided on the first morning. What I've been, I stopped, started again. I have not been slow. I have been trying to be fair to you." "I know," she said. "You knew." "I suspected," she said carefully. "I've been in pack territories. I know what the wolves were doing." I didn't want to presume. She looked down at Drav and then back at me. "I'm still not presuming. I'm just standing here." "That's enough," I said. I meant it. I crossed the hall to her, not quickly, the same deliberate pace she'd used at the gate, which was only fair, which was what the moment called for, and I stopped close enough that I could see the slight unsteadiness in her breathing and knew that she was not as composed as her face suggested. "I don't expect anything," I said, "from a standing trader agreement or from tonight or from anything. I'm telling you what this is. The wolves knew it on the first morning. It took me longer." I paused. "I'm telling you because you're a practical woman and you said you don't walk into things you haven't looked at." She looked at me. Really looked, the way she'd looked at the gray water from the cliff road, taking note, measuring depth. "I'll need time," she said. "I know. I'm not saying no." "I heard that part," I said. Something shifted in her face then, a warmth, a real one, not the small quiet settling from before but an actual warmth, the kind that moves from the inside out. She looked down at Drav again. his great head resting in her hands, and she made a sound that was almost a laugh. "He doesn't do this with anyone," I said. "I know," she said. I was quite surprised. She scratched gently behind Drav's ear, and he made a low sound that I had never heard him make before, satisfied, settled, a sound like the end of a long effort. "I think he's been waiting rather a long time." 9 years, I said. "Give or take." "That's a long wait for a wolf." "He's patient," I said. "I'm less patient, but I'm working on it." She looked up at me. There was the warmth again, and under it something careful and real, the beginning of something that would need a great deal of time and honesty, and probably several more arguments about supply ledgers and route logistics before it settled into what Drav had already concluded it was. "All right," she said. "All right," I said. Drav stayed between us under her hands. The hall was quiet. The wind spoke to the stone. She stayed through the end of the month. Then she left to complete her route. She had traders waiting, supplies that wouldn't move themselves, the practical business of a practical woman. And I stood at the south gate and watched her go, which was not something I usually did with anyone. Byrne sat beside me and watched too. She came back 17 days later. She had not told me when she would return, and I had not asked, because asking felt like the kind of thing that would make her feel like a decision already made rather than a person making one. I had been working on the patience. She came through the south gate at the midday hour with her pack and her correct papers and the salt cedar from the Ashield coast. And Byrne and Koss and Tara were at the gate already because they had known somehow, an hour before I did. Drav came from the inner hall and walked down the cliff road steps to meet her, which he had never done before, for anyone. I came down after him. "Good route?" I asked. "Clean and efficient," she said. "I arranged 2 additional supply contacts on the Graymere run. I'll add them to the harbor registry." "Good." She looked at me, I looked at her. "I thought about it," she said, "while I was away." "What did you think?" "I think," she said carefully, "that I'd like to extend the standing agreement, indefinitely, if that's a thing your harbor office can accommodate." "I'll instruct them to accommodate it." The warmth again, more of it this time. She had 17 days of thinking behind her eyes, and it had brought her to the gate with her papers correct and her pack over her shoulder. And that was, of all the things she could have given me, the thing I had not known I needed. Not a grand arrival, not a proclamation, but a woman who had gone away and thought carefully and come back on purpose. "I'm still a practical woman," she said. "I'll still be moving supply routes. I'll still need to assess things as I go." "I know. I'm not in any hurry to change things." "Neither am I," I said. "Things can change at their own pace." She considered this. Then she looked at Drav, who was sitting at her left shoulder as though he had always stood there, and she said, "I think your wolf has been very patient." "Extraordinary patience," I agreed, "for 9 years." "Well," she looked at me, "he can rest now." She went up the cliff steps ahead of me, and Drav fell into step at her left and Byrne at her right, and the pack that filled the hold of Dravenmore moved around her the way they move around something that has always been here. Not with ceremony, not with display, but with the quiet ease of recognition fulfilled. I followed her in. That was 3 months ago. I will tell you how it stands now, because it is not the story the old tales tell, the sudden claiming, the declaration before the assembled pack, the moment the world rearranges and everyone goes home changed and certain. Our story is smaller than that, and I find that I prefer it. She runs her supply routes. She returns to Dravenmore. The East Guest Room has not, strictly speaking, ceased to be the East Guest Room, but no one has suggested she needs another title for it, and she has not required one. Byrne sleeps at the door. The pack pups have claimed a section of the East Passage as what I can only describe as their permanent post. Drav, who for 9 years held the inner hall with the solemnity of a stone monument, has been observed asleep on the threshold of her room with his legs in the corridor, and has not appeared even slightly ashamed of this. The standing trader agreement is in the harbor registry, exactly as written. There are, separately and additionally, other agreements taking shape between us. Not formal, not sealed, but real. The way things are real when two practical people spend enough time talking honestly about things that matter. She told me last month that she thought Dravenmore's Pack levy structure could be more equitable for borderless traders, and then she explained why in considerable detail and was almost entirely right, and I amended the structure, and she looked at me afterward with an expression I am still, 3 months in, trying to fully read. I think she is still deciding. I think she has been deciding since the first morning at the gate, and that the decision is not one moment but many, each return, each conversation, each time she chooses Dravenmore's Cliff Road over some other direction she could have gone. I am not in a hurry. I have Drav beside me, who is the most patient creature I have ever known, and Saren across the long table in the evenings, working on her supply ledgers with the lamp lit between us, and the gray water out beyond the saltstone cliffs. She looked up at me last night, pen in hand, and said, "The Boneset compound supplier in the third quarter. He's overcharging you by about 15%, and I suspect he's been doing it for years." "I suspect it as well," I said. "And you haven't addressed it." I was waiting for someone with better numbers than mine to confirm it. She gave me a look that was the direct descendant of the look she'd given me at the gate on the first morning, measuring depth, taking note. Then she went back to the ledger. "I'll put together the comparison figures," she said. "I'd be grateful," I said. Outside, the gray water was making its usual argument with the cliffs, and Drav was asleep in his place, and Byrne was in his, and the hall was warm and quiet in the way it has been warm and quiet since she first walked through the gate with her papers correct and her coat over her shoulders, and did not drop her eyes. The wolves knew before either of us did. I believe Drav has been waiting 9 years, not for me. I was already here, but for her. For the morning she would come to the south gate with her pack and her salt cedar and her plain voice and her steadiness, and the gate wolves would sit. It was, in the end, very simple, the simplest thing. She walked into his hall without fear, and the wolf that had waited 9 years had waited, as it turned out, just long enough.